Avraam had been asked by God to put Isaac on the altar. According to tradition, it happened there on the Temple Mount, and we're still here in this area. We learned from this text that God does not want the sacrifice of children. He doesn't even want a sacrifice from us. He wanted the whole of Abraham. He wants the whole of you and me. Now, the binding of Isaac became the basis for a long tradition in Judaism. It's actually one of the biblical texts that was probably one of the most influential texts on the whole of humankind. But I want to focus today on one specific issue. The Midrashim, old Jewish explanations of biblical texts, tell us the background, for example, of the feast of Hanukkah. And they tell us what is transmitted to us as Christians in the Apocrypha. For example, we have in the second book of Maccabees, in chapter 7, it tells us about, there she is not called Hannah, but in Jewish tradition she is called Hannah, who had 7 sons. And it was a time of the uprising of the Jewish people against the Syrians, against the Seleucids, and against the Greek conquerors here, who tried to impose paganism on the Jewish people. And in that time, the ideal of martyrdom came up, and I wanted to tell you in short, or remind you of the story of Hannah and her 7 sons, who here in the area were martyred because they did not want to give up their faith in God. And it's in cruel detail reported there how one son of Hannah after the other was slaughtered in front of her. And before her last child was slaughtered, she cries out to the people who listen, and she says, "Go to our father Abraham and tell him that I have exceeded his instructions. He brought 1 child to his God. I brought 7 of them." And she continues and said, "He only bound him. I sacrificed him." We have a long Jewish tradition that is soaked with the idea that nothing is more important than faith in the one true, only living God. I could remind you here of Rabbi Akiva, who actually was until his 40th birthday, he was not even Jewish, he converted to Judaism. He was cruelly murdered by the Romans. And in the Middle Ages, Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, was the model of those who accepted the slaughter of themselves and their children by not accepting paganism or Christianity. Very often, Jewish people stood in front of the alternative of either the stake or being baptized. And it goes up to the Holocaust, where a lot of believing Jews went into the gas chambers and they had the Shema Israel on their lips, and they did not want to be unfaithful to their God. It actually also formed our Christian belief system. And I can go back into the New Testament where this very story of Abraham was taken up, and where the letter to Hebrews says, by faith Abraham offered up Isaac when he was tested. He offered up his only son, who had received the promises, of whom he had said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." So it's again emphasized that Abraham actually offered his future. And the decisive question here was, and it's not just in the letter to Hebrews, it's with Hannah, it's throughout the ages, that these people who were able to offer themselves up as a living sacrifice because they had hope beyond death. They knew that this life is not everything, but they believed in the one God. And this is what the writer of the letter to Hebrews said, the one God who was able to raise Isaac from the dead. This was the reason that Abraham was able to bring him. Now, you might have realized that long ago I'm, in a way, talking about Jesus, who was able to call his disciples and say, whoever wants to follow me, let him take us his cross and follow me. And whoever would save his life, he will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. This whole thought comes from Isaac, comes from Abraham being able to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And it goes through to Romans, where Paul asks his followers of Jesus to bring their lives, their bodies as living sacrifices to God. I sit here, maybe it is tombs, maybe it's not tombs, we don't know, but we have tombs all over the Holy Land, all over Israel. And if we think of Isaac being ready to bring his son, we think of that one God that is able to raise even the dead out of the tomb.